it wasn't humanly possible. But now you can have all the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are interchangeable. Plus, Game Boy comes with the outrageous new game, Tetris. And for head-to-head competition, use the revolutionary video link and blow your opponent away. Game Boy, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, portable power.
So Derek, John, and Ash, do you know what today is?
Wednesday.
Yes, it is a Wednesday. It's also apparently the 30th anniversary of the Game Boy in North America, which is exciting and also depressing, because that means we're all very old men, except for John, who wasn't even born when the Game Boy came out. Yet, apparently, this is still your first system somehow, right?
Right, yeah, when the Game Boy had a long life. It lasted until, like, what, 2000? After 2000?
It did, yeah. It was discontinued on March 23rd, 2003. So it had an absurdly long lifespan, nearly 15 years. And, of course, it went almost 10 years before a major revision hit worldwide with the Game Boy Pocket, I believe. And then the Game Boy Color a few years later. But yeah, the Game Boy was a massive success. It basically took the idea of the Game & Watch being a portable, game, but made it a platform. You could interchange games, you could swap games. You weren't locked to these simple, these incredibly simple gameplay experiences. Instead, it offered something far more robust. So I thought it'd be fun for us to gather together, talk about, our experience of the Game Boy and our memories of it, and why exactly we think the Game Boy became such a success. Because it ended up selling almost 120 million units worldwide. It sold more than any Nintendo console ever, which is impressive. So I guess to start things off, I want to maybe just begin with where were your first experience with the Game Boy was. Do you remember how you acquired it, or maybe where you first played it? So what got you started on the Game Boy? John, let's go start off with you, since you had probably the most recent take on it.
Sure, yeah, I was late to the party.
Yeah, that's right.
My first experience with the Game Boy was my sister bought a Game Boy with Pokemon Red, and she didn't like it. I think she just jumped on the bandwagon and assumed that she would enjoy it, but she got it for her birthday and barely played it. So I just sort of took it off her and just started playing Pokemon Red on that thing. And then that led to playing Mario Land and Tetris and so many other Game Boy games. And it's what got me into gaming. After that, I got a Dreamcast, and my household after that was kind of like a Sega household. I got a Mega Drive after that. So without the Game Boy, I'm not sure I'd even be on this discussion right now. It's what got me on the track to enjoying games.
Wow.
What an interesting track through gaming history. You started with the Game Boy and then went from that to the Dreamcast. I think that might be the first time I've ever heard that.
Well, the other thing is, he said he went back to the Mega Drive, so my God.
Right, yeah.
Well,
no,
Sega
how
was
cool.
huge in Europe at the time. Like, you'd see Mega Drives and Master Systems and Game Gears in basically any gaming shop, whereas Nintendo barely existed apart from the Game Boy.
That's insane, because I never saw a Master System in the wild.
It's nuts, because they're all over the place here. In any retro shop, you will see a Master System.
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw a Master System in the wild. I mean, Genesises were pretty, ubiquitous, but yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a Master System in the wild.
I got my Game Boy for, I don't know the exact year, but I do know I got it for Christmas. I got it and a copy of Tetris and Super Mario Land.
Those were the two games again, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got it pretty close to launch. And that thing was amazing. At the time, it blew your kid mind because you never were able to take it anywhere before. So now all of a sudden, when I'm getting dragged to my grandparents' house or dragged to something I didn't want to go to, I had video games I could bring with me, and it was amazing. And I think that's why it sold so well, because all of a sudden it was this refuge for kids to not have to pay attention to what they're actually around. And parents were like, "Hey, it's a road trip. Play your Game Boy."
The Game Boy really was a perfect grandparent's companion. It was the best thing to own then. How about you, Ash?
There really was something like it at the time, and it's funny, one of my most vivid gaming memories is when I got the Game Boy. I actually quite clearly remember it, and I think it was for my birthday, and I was with my dad. He took me to the local mall, the Thousand Oaks Mall, and I think it was Babbage's back then. Wasn't EB Games or Game? I think it was Babbage's.
Yeah, I think it was.
Then. Yeah, and I think it was my birthday. He got me a Game Boy, and I believe I got Super Mario Land, Tetris, and Alleyway. All three of which are obviously awesome. And I remember playing it in the car ride on the way home. And I think the first night I had it, I dropped it, and I was so embarrassed because, and I think it was in front of my dad too. But fortunately, the thing is like a brick. So
it was made out of Nintendo.
A billion times and it would be fine. So, long story short, the thing was fine. But no, I remember it vividly, and I remember it changing. It was so transformative for me. As you said, Derek, now, there's nothing like it. You could bring your games on the go and put in some headphones and jam out to games during road trips or while you're doing things, your parents are running errands, you're stuck in the mall, whatever. It's great. So, no, I very vividly remember it, and I have a lot of fond memories of trying and failing over and over again to beat Super Mario Land, and then finally doing it once I was a little older.
So, Ash, you kind of touched on something right there, I think, without fully realizing it. You played the Game Boy on your way home after buying it. How cool is that? That's something you couldn't do back then. You were able to play a brand new Mario game while in your car on the way home minutes after buying the thing.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I remember even then, I probably was, 5 or 6? And I remember even then playing Super Mario Land and being, this is a little weird. This feels different. This is like off-brand Mario. What are these weird enemies? Why am I, firing these little, black ball things instead of fireballs? But I loved it. It was like this weird alternate take on what Mario could be, and it felt like it gave the Game Boy its own little thing to try, and I loved it.
Mario Land felt like a trap most of the time because it took everything you're used to and just changed it. It's like, oh, I got fireballs. Why is it bouncing all over the place? Oh, hey, a Koopa. Let's send it at the next enemy. Wait, why is it exploding on me? It's like everything felt like it was designed to get you. And I remember those Shang-Chi, those jumping enemies from the, I think the 3rd or 4th level. And they were just the bane of my existence because they took 2 hits.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, I remember that.
To be fair, there wasn't every Mario game back then like the odd one, because it went from Mario Brothers to Mario 2 for overseas gamers, which is weird, or us, I mean. And then it went to did Mario Land precede Mario 3, or I can't remember now.
I think it came before Mario 3.
I think so.
So at the time, it really wasn't that far out of line compared to the rest of the series. But it wasn't really until Mario 3, I feel like, where they kind of like established a roadmap for the series, or like a template.
What was really cool too is the Game Boy was a bit of a beefcake at the time, and the visuals were quite comparable to that of the NES. Like, look at Mario Land 2. That looks better than so many NES games. And the jump from Mario Land 1 to Mario Land 2 is extreme.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of the Game Boy's success, is that I think a lot of people credited the Vita and now the Switch as well with offering a console-like experience at home, or rather on the go. But I think the Game Boy kind of beat everyone to it. Like, this is the first one where it didn't feel like it was lagging behind current tech, even though it was, it wasn't state-of-the-art tech, but it was enough to offer a largely NES-like experience on the go, which was just insane at the time.
It was offering me personally a Super Nintendo experience on the go, because I didn't have an SNES growing up, and I was super jealous of everybody that had Donkey Kong Country. However, the Game Boy allowed me to play the Donkey Kong Land games, and I love those. And those looked really good on the Game Boy. I haven't seen them in a while, so I don't know if they hold up, but at the time, it was like, man, it's black and white, but it still looks really good.
It looked really impressive, although it was a little bit hard to tell sometimes the characters on the background, considering everything was just the same 4 shades of gray. But the animation is fantastic. Yeah, they did a really great job like capturing the feel of some 16-bit games even on the Game Boy. Obviously on a much lower scale, but yeah. So it's for all these reasons that I think I was so excited to get a Game Boy back. I forget what year exactly it was. It probably wasn't too long after it came out, so probably 89, 90-ish, I'm guessing. But I remember vividly, I was playing in the backyard. We were living in an apartment at the time. I was playing on our slip and slide in the backyard. It was like a hot summer day, which is why I'm thinking I may have got it the same year it came out, because it came out during the summer, obviously, being July 31st today. And yeah, I remember I was playing the slip and slide. My mom just came home. She's like, "Hey, look what I got you, a Game Boy." I'm like, "What? A Game Boy? Well, screw you, slip and slide. I'm going to go play the Game Boy." Nice. Now, the great thing about the Game Boy is, though, or perhaps ironically, is that for being a handheld system, of course you could play anywhere. But the Game Boy was a system you almost had to play outside because it didn't have a built-in light at all. So you had to have some kind of light source, and the sun was pretty much perfect for that. So either a sun or one of those plain overhead lights. It was only one of those two things. If you didn't have one of those, you really couldn't play the Game Boy efficiently. But yes, I just started playing Tetris and whatever else my mom got me. It probably was just Tetris, and I remember it blowing my little brain. It's like, wow, I can play just these really compelling gameplay experiences on the go, and it really can't be understated just how important Tetris was, I think, to the Game Boy success. Because that game really was like perhaps one of the first killer apps you could have, period. It was a perfect bite-sized experience that you could play endlessly. You never got bored of it. It even had a 2-player mode if you wanted to play with a friend, and you could play it anywhere. I think that alone, that was really the Wii Sports of the Game Boy generation.
Mm-hmm. And this version of Tetris...
Absolutely.
This version of Tetris still holds up in my opinion too. Like there's things that make it distinct from modern Tetris, like you can't hold blocks. When the speed goes up, you can't rotate them when they land. You have to place them immediately. It's a lot more unforgiving, but that kind of makes it fun too. So it's as you were saying, it was endless fun back in the day, and I still think it's a lot of fun now.
I could be mistaken, but I believe the creator of Tetris, I forget his name, but I believe he cited the Game Boy one as his favorite version too.
I think so, and I think his name is Alexei Pajitnov. I'm
yeah,
not sure how to say
sounds
his name.
Close to
I think
right.
it's that. Yeah, and there's a reason we were all so excited when Tetris 99 announced that throwback Tetris Game Boy theme, because that's the version of Tetris we all remember, the one we all grew up playing, and I agree, it is still one of the best versions of Tetris, and there's just something about that chunky feeling to the blocks in that version of the game, where everything kind of feels heavier, and as you said, John, it's not necessarily, you don't get as many perks or as many advantages as you do in later versions of the game, like being able to hold pieces and such. So it definitely still holds up, and it's one of the few games that my mom, she got her own Game Boy along with me, or maybe like a week or month after me, so that she could play Tetris with me. That's still one of the only games that she would consistently play with me, along with Dr. Mario and various Pac-Man games. And she would just always want to play, get our link cable and play 2-player Tetris, which sounds so ridiculous nowadays, but that link cable, you had to have that.
Yep.
Right. This reminds me of a quote I heard about Nintendo marketing Tetris when the Game Boy was coming out. And they said if you bundle the Game Boy of Mario Land, you'll sell it to a male demographic. If you bundle it with Tetris, you'll sell it to everyone. And as Ash was saying, it did sell to everyone. There was men, women, children. Everyone was buying a Game Boy just for Tetris.
Despite being called a Game Boy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I have vivid memories of a family trip down to Florida, and I had my Game Boy with me, and every so often my dad or my mom would ask to play Tetris while we were going down. They would actually take the Game Boy from me and play it themselves, and switch off whenever they switched off driving. So it was really funny. It was like whoever was in the passenger seat got to play Tetris, and I didn't.
Nice.
They kind of stole it from me.
Oh, man.
It's funny, Andre, you mentioned the light problem earlier, and that's so true, because you'd always have to be sitting next to a window if you were in a room, or, you'd hope that there was enough light getting into the car when you were playing in the back seat. But I don't know about you guys. I had one of those really janky, attachable lights on a little, on a little swivel arm that you can kind of arc it over the screen, and it was never a very good, solution, but it worked.
Were they the worm lights?
Yeah, the worm lights. That's what they're called.
Yeah.
So I had one of those, and it got so much use. I think I also had a magnifying thing. Now that I think about it,
I had that too.
The handy boy, baby. I had. Well, there were a few different forms. I had the bulkiest one you could get. I think I had the full-on handy boy. It had the magnifying glass. It had a light built in, so you would actually pull the magnifying glass out away from the screen to make it look far bigger. Right. It had the fold-out speakers that you plugged into the headphone port.
Oh my god!
It had a joystick and bigger buttons you could latch on top of it, and all this was powered through the battery port by connecting these really thin aluminum strips to it. It really felt it didn't feel secure, but it worked. And that was kind of it made the machine look like just a Frankenstein monster. But things like this were kind of necessary back in the day because we were a lot more forgiving streaming back then, obviously, because how else were we going to play games on the go? But going back to the Game Boy now is pretty rough. Not just for those reasons, not just because it's hard to see the screen with poor lighting conditions. Although, to be fair, it was better than the Game Boy Advance, or somehow made it even worse. But also, the refresh rate on the Game Boy was horrible. It was really bad, which I believe they fixed with the Game Boy Pocket and then subsequent Game Boys as well. But on the Game Boy, like, if you move too quick, everything would just turn into a smear, which I think is partially why the Game Boy Mario games, are a little bit slower than most of the other console Marios, just so that you could see what you were doing. But with any fast-paced game, it would make it really tough to see what was going on.
And that's also why Tetris is kind of ingenious, because it's just this single-screen game where you move blocks around. Like, you don't need that fast refresh rate.
Also, what's really funny about Tetris 2, when Ash mentioned like I had a chunky feel earlier, I'm like, wow, that's a perfect fit for the Game Boy itself, which has this chunky brick block-like feel to it. So,
yeah.
Oh man, 4 AA batteries just getting sucked down all the time.
Actually, not quite though, because the Game Boy had an insane battery life. It would go. The official figures, I believe, were between 10 to 30 hours. I think depending on what game you played. And I don't know if I ever got 30 hours out of it, but I remember it lasting quite a long time, especially in comparison to its competition which would come out, which would follow, such as the Game Gear, which would suck down 6 AA batteries in, I believe, in 2 hours. I think.
It was real bad.
Yeah.
It was so bad.
To its credit, though, the Game Gear was backlit and in color, so the screen was better. But yeah, you can't justify a 2-hour battery life on 6 AA's.
I mean, the Game Boy really does kind of speak to like Nintendo's mantra over most of its lifespan, where they focus on not necessarily having the best tech always, but having the tech that kind of like works the best for most people. The Game Boy screen wasn't great. It wasn't necessarily uncomfortable, but wasn't a very comfortable system either. But yet, it took the marketplace by storm. It became a wildly successful system because you could play it anywhere. You could play anywhere on the go without having to worry about the battery running out on you. And you had a huge selection of fantastic, or maybe some people might. I think the Game Boy's library is kind of debatable for a lot of people. I think it had a really strong library for the top echelon of games, but there was a lot of crap on the Game Boy too. To be fair,
lots of ports and whatnot.
Yeah.
So.
I can't believe we've gone nearly 20 minutes and no one has said Donkey Kong 94. We've said Donkey Kong Land.
Right?
Donkey Kong 94 is one of the best video games, period. I didn't play it on the Game Boy, I originally played it on 3DS Virtual Console, and I thought it was just a bog-standard Game Boy port of the original arcade Donkey Kong. And then you get past those initial 3 levels, and it opens up into this entirely different game. And Mario is just so fluid in that game. I think Mario's movement in Donkey Kong 64... Donkey Kong 94 kind of pioneered his Mario 64 movement. He can backflip, he can do these handstands. It's such a great game, it still feels really good today.
Absolutely. I still have gone back to that game in recent years, and I'm still floored by just how well Mario controls in that game. And it feels like such a meaty experience, too. It's a long game, and it feels like this cool what-if extension of the original Donkey Kong. Like, what if the story continued? What would Donkey Kong do after his initial defeat? And it was such a cool idea, and so well executed.
It's easily the best Mario vs. Donkey Kong game. None of them have quite come close to this.
Not yet.
Does this even have to be said, John?
True. I mean, like, you look at it, though, and it does look like a Mario vs. Donkey Kong game, but it's far more ingenious. I think it feels a bit closer to the arcade Donkey Kong, but while like throwing in some puzzles as well.
Well, I mean, not just that, but also like a huge moveset at the time. Like, it introduced moves that wouldn't really be used until the 3D games. Like, Mario's like doing handstands and backflips, all kinds of wild stuff in that game. And it worked really well on the Game Boy screen because it offered more of a zoomed out perspective, so there wasn't like a whole lot of screen movement, which again worked because of the screen's low refresh rate. So yeah, it was like a perfect platformer / puzzle game for the platform. It was pretty much custom made for it. Also, real quick, that was also kind of the launch title for the Super Game Boy, which came out, I think, around the same time, which let you play Game Boy games on your Super Nintendo, so on your TV, so basically kind of like an early version of the Switch. And in some games cases, such as Donkey Kong, it would offer some additional features, like adding a special color palette with additional colors than what you get for other games. Also, special borders that would offer a full 256 colors, like a Super Nintendo game.
I wish I had an SNES growing up, because I never had to experience any of that. I went to cousin's house and saw theirs and be super jealous, but it's just like I missed out on a lot of the functionality that the Game Boy had because of that. And it was still at the time where most of my games were getting bought by my parents, so it was very much familiar thing, so not really knowing what else to get.
I just remember the pure novelty of the Super Game Boy. I had one, and I loved that thing. And
Same here.
I remember, like, of course, for me, a lot of these Game Boy, older Game Boy soundtracks were like formative music of my years. So for me, being able to hear this Game Boy music pumping through actual like TV speakers was super cool. And then I know, Andre, you're gonna roll your eyes. I can hear it already, but Mega Man 5 used amazing use of the Super Game Boy. It was one of the few Game Boy games that actually did have unique color palettes and supported that functionality of the Super Game Boy. So I had to get it in there. It's also a really good game. But yeah.
That is super cool. One cool thing about the Super Game Boy as well is today it is the best way to play Game Boy games on a console. The Game Boy player actually compresses the image a bit. The disc that it comes with doesn't give you the best quality you can get. So if you want to play a Game Boy game on your TV today, the Super Game Boy is still the best way to do it.
Actually, John, I'm sorry, man. I gotta call you out. You're actually wrong about this. The best way to play Game Boy games on the TV is the Super Game Boy 2, which is only released in Japan. Because one of the problems with the Super Game Boy, which is something I never noticed, maybe I would now knowing this, is apparently it ran games, I believe, slightly faster than they were meant to on the original Game Boy hardware, which the Super Game Boy 2 fixed. It also included a data port, or the link cable port, so you could play true 2 players if you had the second Game Boy, or I think even the second Super Game Boy 2, which is something the original Super Game Boy didn't have. So I actually bought one a few months ago, so maybe I'll do a video feature on it at some point. I haven't used it myself yet, it's still in the box, but that might be fun to like fully explore and maybe compare, so I can show you, John, why the Super Game Boy 2 is better than the Super Game Boy. So maybe we should get into what some of our favorite games are. We just touched on Donkey Kong 94, but there are quite a few other good games there, including, I think Derek will back me up on this one, maybe, this was the birthplace of Kirby.
Recently, we compared two superheroes, Dashing Super Guy and Kirby from Nintendo. In some ways, Kirby lost big. No big hair, no big muscles, no weapons, nothing. All Kirby's got is appetite. Kirby's Dream Land, the thrilling new adventure game on Game Boy. Kirby munches, spits back, and floats, saving glorious Dreamland. He's Kirby, and he packs a mean bite. Kirby's Dream Land only on Game Boy. Game Boy sold separately.
Kirby got a start on the Game Boy with Kirby's Dream Land, one of the earlier Game Boy titles. Actually, more. Actually, yeah, it is. In the grand scheme of things, early Game Boy titles. If we're going by modern times, it'd probably be a mid-generational title. But yeah, Kirby's Dream Land was, a solid 2D platformer. Back then, with it being Kirby's introduction, you couldn't even absorb powers yet. Instead, you could inhale enemies and breathe them back out. But that was it. You couldn't take their power. But it kind of offered it was more of an intro to platformers for a wider demographic, or even a younger demographic. Particularly with how Kirby could fly everywhere. So if there was a gap or a tough enemy, you just fly over it. Don't worry about it. So I remember having a blast with this game, even though by today's standards it's pretty short. I think it had 4 stages. I think split into 2 each maybe. You could beat the thing in less than an hour easily. But it also did include a hard mode once you beat the game, which is quite a bit tougher. So did you guys all play Kirby's Dream Land back when it came out originally?
I didn't, actually. I missed out on the Kirby bus until Kirby's Dream Land 2. And that's when he got, that was even after Kirby's Adventure, so he did have the extra powers, but it was also the game that introduced all the animal buddies, and that was really cool, just grabbing different powers and seeing how they mix and match with the different buddies and trying to find everything. And I loved Kirby from that point on. Like, he's always been such a memorable character. Didn't get to play him much because after the Game Boy and after the NES, I didn't really get Nintendo games until the GameCube, but it was still really cool to experience him, and that was one of my favorite games on the Game Boy.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, I had the opposite experience. I did play Kirby's Dream Land back when it first came out, and I loved it, but for some reason I just missed Dream Land 2. I don't know why. It wasn't intentional, but I wouldn't play Dream Land 2 until much later on the Virtual Console. So, or 3DS Virtual Console, I should say. So, yeah, but I loved Kirby at the time. Of course, he is now, since become my favorite Nintendo character ever. I just love the guy, love his series. And, Kirby's Dream Land, I have clear memories of playing it, and I was very happy for that hard mode, because like you, Andre, I eventually discovered, well, this game's actually pretty short once you know what you're doing. And so the hard mode was quite a bit more difficult, as you said, and that was a nice reason to keep coming back.
I never actually beat Dreamland 2 because there was that one star drop I couldn't figure out how to get to as a kid.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah. And I just have to, I basically just keep make a new game so I could just keep playing through the levels I did like and could play, but I never saw the final boss until much later in life.
I didn't give Dreamland respect for a while. So the first Kirby game I played was Kirby's Adventure on the NES. And I played Dreamland after that second, and I was just like, why can't you inhale enemy abilities? Why does this game suck? but afterwards, after realizing like it came before, it was a bit more primitive. I did realize it's still a lot of fun. Like, there are limitations to it, but it does still hold up pretty well.
Yeah, and it looked really good at the time too, because they used this the sprites were kind of bigger in general, and it had a very simple art style, so it made it really stand out on the Game Boy screen, I found. Now, interesting fun fact is, because it's on the Game Boy, it was black and white. And so Kirby, in game didn't have an established color, and because of this, and because of a coloring error on the official box art and cartridge art, Kirby's actually white on the North American version of the game, at least, which is something that would be fixed for Kirby's Dream Land 2, and of course Kirby's Adventure and all subsequent Kirby games. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I'm so glad it was too. Can you guys imagine if Kirby was still like white? It just wouldn't. It wouldn't. I mean, I guess if he would, that would feel right to us because that's all we would know. But I just can't imagine. Can you guys?
I mean,
not really.
I remember. I think it's only because we're used to it now, right? I think the weirdest thing looking back though is that his shoes are also white, so he's just like this small white,
he's like Ghost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a little bit odd in that sense. I never played Kirby's Dream Land 2 myself, despite owning it. I'm looking at it right here. I bought it, years later. However, I did play another amazing Kirby game on the Game Boy, being Kirby's Pinball Land.
Oh yeah,
I love this game. I was hooked on this game. I still go back every now and then, and every time I do, I just find myself absorbed into it. What a cool idea! It's basically like a platforming pinball game. Even more so, I would say. I think it does it better than Kirby or than Sonic's Pinball, which Kirby's Dream Land did precede it, by the way. I'm pretty sure. And yeah, it's just a really fun idea, where there are actual boss fights, there are objectives, there are multiple pinball tables, and it's not just about getting a high score, it is about beating this game, and I loved it.
It was a great game. I had it as well, and I remember I kept going back to it, and you're right, Andre, it is way better than Sonic's Pinball in every way. And there wasn't really much like it at the time either, so it was just kind of a cool new, I know you and I share a love of pinball for the NES, but other than that, there was nothing really like it at the time, and yeah, it was great, and it really showed that you could do more with a pinball game than just pure pinball.
That Sonic Spinball comparison is pretty good, because if you go back and play Sonic Spinball now, the actual pinball physics are really bad. Sonic, it just feels so floaty, you can't really aim properly, whereas Kirby's Pinball still feels really good.
And the genius of Kirby's Pinball 2 is each stage consisted of 3 vertical screens, if I recall correctly. But for the most part, except when you're transitioning between screens, the screen didn't move. So again, that worked to the Game Boy's benefit, but also let you, strategically play pinball, where you can try and plan your shots. Whereas on Sonic, the screen is moving constantly, so you really have no idea where you're sending him. You're gonna hit Sonic and to see where he goes, where he flies off to. So Kirby's Pinball Land was a fantastic game, and it saddens me that we haven't had a proper sequel to it yet. Because Mario's Pinball Land doesn't do it justice.
Right.
I missed out on Kirby's Pinball. I did have Pokemon Pinball.
Another good one.
That was fun.
Yeah, that one leaned more into the actual pinball side of things, but it was a very good game for that reason. And also, it was fun too, because it did bring in the whole capture mechanic of trying to capture Pokemon. And speaking of which, we have to talk about Pokemon.
Hey, little buddy, want a ride?
Pikachu!
Yeah, whatever. I'll be right back.
Where can you catch all 150 Pokemon?
it.
On your Game Boy, that's where. Pokemon for Game Boy is here. With both packs, you can catch them all. Games and systems sold.
Because this game gave the Game Boy, like, it came out almost 10 years after the Game Boy did. I think in the States in 98, I believe. I believe it was 96 in Japan, so a little bit sooner. But still, like, this would be long after most systems are dead. But the Game Boy is still alive and kicking, and not only that, it gave it a huge burst of life. And I remember when I got Pokemon, me and my friends were obsessed with this game. We came out just a few weeks before a festival in the little town I lived in called Issaquah, which is a huge festival. People come all over the state to it. Some people would even fly in. Like, there would be 200,000 people descending on this, at the time, small town. And while it was a fun festival, my friends and I spent the entire weekend just outside playing Pokemon, just capturing Pokemon, playing it. And I remember, like, after school, we'd just be obsessed with it. I remember I'd be walking to my friend's house, playing Pokemon along the way, trying to beef up my team to compete with them in battles. This game was an obsession. Like, it's the closest thing I've seen to Pokemon Go before Pokemon Go. People of our age were obsessed with this game.
It consumed my life, absolutely. I had Pokemon Red, and my best friend at the time had Pokemon Blue, and, you know, the usual chaos ensued. You know, we would train our teams up to try to beat each other and actually play, like, legit Pokemon and really try to out-strategize each other. You know, unfortunately, in Gen 1, that usually just meant getting, like, a Psychic type on your team, and then you're good to go. You know, that's really all you needed. But, you know, it was a lot of fun until we, of course, figured out the exploits and the glitches and the item, you know, duplicating, and he wanted to do all that and, like, you know, get a party full of Mewtwo's and Mews, and I was like, no, let's just stay legit, and he's like, no, I'm gonna maximize my power and cheat, and I'm like, oh, okay, and that kind of killed it for me, at least playing with him, but I would go on to play future games in the series as well, but, oh man, Pokemon Red and Blue utterly dominated my life.
Yeah. It's kind of funny how the actual concept of Pokemon, where you go around collecting monsters and you fight random trainers in the world, really wasn't that far removed from the actual experience of playing the game itself. Where, like, if you were at school, you could just, you know, you could challenge other people at school to their to Pokemon. You could battle their team. So
now, could you actually do that? Because at my school, they were pretty quickly banned because of Pokemon. Game Boys were fine in school before, but because of Pokemon, my school at least banned them.
No, I don't think they were banned at my school ever.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah. You were lucky.
My school banned them.
Yeah.
Oof. Really?
I can't remember if mine did or not. I don't remember it too much, but I do know that I got, like, I see Pokemon around, saw the commercials and whatnot. I was like, this looks silly. I mean, it didn't really click with me at first. And then my mother came home from shopping one day, and she said to me, he's like, hey, I found this Game Boy game in the parking lot, just on the ground. Do you know what this is?
Wait, what?
And
That's amazing.
She gave me a copy of Pokemon Blue. I popped it in, started playing it. It was worked just fine. And sure enough, I got addicted to it. I love that game and just played it endlessly. And I still remember, like, all the little things that you had to kind of figure out on your own, because I remember, you know, having a Pidgey on my team, and I'd use Gust. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, he learned how to use Whirlwind. Sweet, that must be a stronger version of Gust. And so I replaced it. Nope, just blows the enemy away. So I was trying to catch my first Pokemon. I was like, what the heck?
There's someone listening to this thinking like, I lost a copy of Pokemon Blue.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Sorry I stole your copy, but yeah.
I was actually going to ask, do you remember, like, when you loaded up the game, was there a save file there? Do you remember? Or?
I feel like there was, but I can't remember. I remember, I think, having to look up, like, what, you know, how to delete a save file or something like that, or because I remember going to save first and being like, nope, you can't overwrite it because there's all of this previous one. It's like, oh, what the heck? So I had to somehow figure that out, and eventually did.
So not only did this poor kid have his game stolen from by your mom, but then you just erased his entire existence out of it. Wow.
Yep, screw him.
No regrets. But you were kind of touching on something there, Derek, real quick, with how with the initial Pokemon game, it was a learning experience. Like, it was entirely new to us, to everyone. No one knew what they were doing except from what we could gather from the anime, which launched a few weeks earlier, which by the way was fantastic. I was obsessed with the anime for a while. I remember running home from school with my friends just to watch the Pokemon cartoon. But anyways, more to my point is the original Pokemon game captured a sensation I've never felt with a Pokemon game since, or any game since. Like, it was so fun to go through this world for the first time, exploring the complete unknown, building your team, catching all these Pokemon that we're seeing for the first time, and in an era when people hadn't run the math, run the numbers, figured out the optimal strategy. Everyone was completely ignorant to this, and before it was ruined by everyone, just kind of like, to me, ruined by everyone figuring, working out the math. It felt more organic then, and that's something I miss. It's something that will never again be recaptured, I think. So that's partially why I haven't gotten into Pokemon games since. Like, there's no recapturing that feeling I had the first time, which is fine. I had a great time the first time, and I appreciate it for what it was.
I think that's also why Mewtwo is so special to so many people, because he was like the big secret. It's like, holy crap, this thing's amazing.
Yeah. Well, the big secret, unless you account for Mew under the truck next to the SSN, obviously.
Right.
Which, by the way, I use a Game Shark to catch a Mew, and I felt bad about it. But I told my friends that my game is glitched to give me a Mew. I couldn't admit to using a Game Shark.
Nice, and they believed you. I love it.
I don't think. I mean, they said they did. I don't know if they truly believed it, because they knew one of our mutual friends had a Game Shark for the Game Boy, so they probably suspected that that's how I got it.
Well, you guys will like this. Is that I it's partially Pokemon related, but one of the best games on the N64 was Pokemon Puzzle League, but I didn't have an N64 at the time, so I had Pokemon Puzzle Tournament or something like that. Basically the Game Boy, or maybe it was the Game Boy Color version of it and whatnot. But that's how I played that game. It's just, that's how I got into the Puzzle League series.
Nice. One thing I would like to shout out in terms of the Game Boy is the fact that Konami had a really good run on the Game Boy. This was back when Konami was not only making games, but making good games.
Well, this is a long time ago.
I know, a long time ago. And they used to make really good licensed games, believe it or not, based on the Ninja Turtles and also Warner Brothers properties like Tiny Toons. So the Tiny Toons games for Game Boy were really good, but more than that, there were 3 TMNT games, and I played the crap out of all of them. The first one was Follow the Foot Clan, which, in hindsight, wasn't a very good game, but it was true to the cartoon. But the second one, Back from the Sewers, I must have played that game from beginning to finish, like, at least 50 times. I just love that game. I devoured it. It was like an arcade-style beat-em-up and really well realized for the Game Boy and its small screen. And then the third game was pretty good too, but it was too hard, and nobody really talks about that one. But just, Konami was making really good licensed games for the Game Boy, and I know I spent a lot of time playing them personally.
Well, speaking of large companies back in the day making kind of like maybe underappreciated Game Boy games, Rare was making Game Boy games back then too, before they were even known as Rare. I think they were still were the Ultimate games back then, if I remember correctly.
Or what were they called? Yeah,
I'm looking at my game now, and it's not. I can't even find their name on it. But basically, they were the developers of a game called Sneaky Snakes on the Game Boy, which is like a puzzle platformer game. I never beat it. The game gets impossible later on, but it was really fun. Like, it was just a really different take on it, where the idea was, I think you had to like eat enough enemies to make your snake stronger, or longer rather. So it's a little bit like the Nokia game in that sense, but it's a platformer instead. And yeah, it was just a really fun, like, early Rare game, so...
This sounds like the same... Yeah, this was an early Rare game for the NES also, called Snake, Rattle, and Roll, which I still have, actually.
Right,
I think the art looks similar, I think. I never played that one, though, but I don't know if it's a true successor, or...
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, anyways, of course, and then speaking of Rare, there's the Donkey Kong games we touched on earlier, the Donkey Kong Land games, which I had a blast with. Donkey Kong Land 3 in particular is really good, I found. I'd have to replay the games to be sure, but I remember almost preferring it to the Super Nintendo one, so...
Oh, wow.
That just jogged a memory. So, my grandmother got a Game Boy, and she was like 70 years old at the time.
This was truly the Wii, the Wii of our generation.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I remember going to her house. She had, I think it was a Game Boy Pocket, it was a yellow one, and she had a copy of Donkey Kong Land 3 and Tetris. And she's never played games before in her life. And I just remember watching her play Donkey Kong Land, and she was pretty good. It's just nuts, though. You're right. Like, it was a phenomenon. Everyone had a Game Boy.
Yeah. It
Really
was
did.
wild.
Yeah.
It was just a really fun era. And I guess real quick, we'll get back to the games in a moment. Let's talk about the feel of the Game Boy real quick. Because that thing in hindsight was a beast. It was like pretty much a brick. But at the time, like, it was, we didn't know better. It was the only thing you could play a game on portably with interchangeable cartridges. And it wasn't, it wasn't obscenely big. I think like the Game Gear, as I recall, was far bigger. So the Game Boy, while now it looks to be on the larger side, back then it actually felt kind of like on the smaller side almost, I suppose. Like compared to like what a console would be. And it had like actually a decent feel to it, I suppose, like where decent like weight, and it was also not, I wouldn't say comfortable, but again it wasn't uncomfortable to hold because you could actually get a good grasp on it with how with how thick it was. So
yeah, no, I mean, even back in the day, the Game Gear felt large. Like even then, you could tell, like, oh man, this doesn't feel as portable as the Game Boy.
Right.
But yeah, back then, without the hindsight of modern technology, I thought that thing felt pretty portable and like tidy. But then, of course, the first time I held my old Game Boy in the modern era and like went back to it, I was like, this thing is a brick. How, oh my god, it's huge. But no, back then it really did feel small. I agree.
Even the Game Boy Pocket that came out in '96 kind of showed how much, showed how big the Game Boy was in hindsight. But
Yeah.
Right. Nothing's compromised though with the Game Boy. Like, you still have the same controller as the NES. There's still a D-pad. There's still A, B buttons. There's still start and select. The Game Gear didn't have a select button, so that has one more button than the Game Gear had. And you really could do any game the NES had, and you could even do some games that the Super Nintendo had, like Derek was touching upon earlier of Donkey Kong Land. What about Link's Awakening?
Down with Zelda from the very start. I got the heart, it's Mars to play the part. Down with Zelda. Creeping through with an overhead view, cause a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. So I stay on track, collect the facts, never cut the slack, and I always watch my back for Jack. Down with Zelda, yeah. Strong I stand, I'm the man with the plan, cause the power's in my head and the power's in my hand. Down with Zelda.
That game's being remade in 2 months, and they're barely changing anything, because the Game Boy version was pretty much solid as it was.
That's a great point. Yeah, this is following A Link to the Past, and it didn't feel held back by being on the Game Boy. It felt like a true, proper, maybe not successor to A Link to the Past, but it definitely felt connected. The biggest drawback was just the 2 buttons at the time, because you had to go into the inventory constantly to swap your items, which is something that is being addressed in the remake. But yeah, this was a fantastic game that didn't feel held back at all by the technology. It offered a full-scale Zelda game on the go, which was amazing at the time.
And even the Game Boy Advance didn't get 4 face buttons. Like, it was still just A and B. It had LNR shoulder buttons, but even then, it still wasn't like a huge jump over what the Game Boy had.
Good point.
Yeah, I have a funny story about Link's Awakening. I remember being really excited about it, and back then I would follow video game release dates, but it wasn't quite the same thing as it is today, where release dates months and months in advance sometimes. But I remember pestering my mom to call the EB Games or whatever. I think it was EB Games at the time, Electronics Boutique actually, and check and see if it was out yet. And even then, what would eventually become GameStop sucked, because I remember the person on the other line told her, "Oh, that Zelda Game Boy game, it's been canceled. Yeah, it's not coming out anymore." Yeah, and I'm like, that. Even my, I was 8 at the time. I'm like, that can't be true. So eventually, she called other stores and found that guy was completely wrong. But GameStop was still sucking before it was even GameStop.
Go figure. That's not a huge surprise.
Yeah.
Right? I know.
God.
Do we talk about Mario Land too much?
Obey me, Wario. I am your master. Mario is your enemy.
The wicked imposter Wario has cast an evil spell over Mario Land.
Don't let Mario get the 6 golden coins. Don't let Mario reach the palace.
This is the biggest, most dangerous, most challenging Game Boy adventure yet.
Obey Wario. Destroy Mario.
Don't fall under Wario's evil spell in Super Mario Land 2. Only on Game Boy.
I know we mentioned that
really.
Mario
Not
Land.
so
Yeah,
much.
this was the successor, of course, to Mario Land. But this one it was still weird, but it felt definitely more in line to what Mario would be known as. This is coming shortly after Super Mario World, and this one felt actually not too dissimilar. Like, it felt like you were exploring a world as well. Like, you had a whole island to go around. It didn't feel quite as large as it did in Mario World. You could say it's a land, but you were exploring completely differently themed areas. And yeah, this is like just a really competent game. Like I think this one holds up far better than Mario Land itself did.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
Like, it's still fun to go back to Mario Land 2. It still looks pretty good. It used like much larger sprites. The world design felt unique. Like I remember looking at a giant Mario statue that the levels take place within, and just how impressed I was by that mechanical monster.
You were saying earlier, Andre, how basically every Mario game in that era was different to the last. You had Mario 1, you had Mario 2, Mario 3, they were all different. Mario Land was different. And Mario Land 2, like, there's no grass world or lava world or underwater world. You have space. You have inside a giant Mario. You have inside a whale. Every single world in this place. Everything was weird and different. And that's why I appreciate it so much. I think that's part of why it still feels so good. But also the platforming mechanics are much, much stronger than first Mario Land.
And the rabbit ears!
Right. And exactly, the carrot power-up.
Yep.
I just loved it how it genuinely felt like a kind of a version of Super Mario World that you could take on the go. Obviously, it wasn't one-to-one, but there were secret exits. You know, you had, and they were really well hidden secret exits. Yeah. Like it felt good to find a secret exit that then took you to a different part of the map that you didn't know you could go to. And that's what I love so much about Super Mario World as well. So I think it very well replicated that kind of feeling of discovery in a Game Boy game.
One of my favorite Game Boy experiences, actually, is something that came out toward the tail end of the primary Game Boy's lifespan, and that is the Game Boy Camera. I loved this thing. I believe at the time it held the record for being the smallest digital camera in the world. Maybe I'm making that up. Wow. I'm pretty sure that was the case. Now, of course, this is a camera capable of taking pictures of a resolution of, I think, 160 by 144 at best, maybe even less than that, and in 4 colors of gray. Despite this, it was amazing. I remember going to, I think it was a Grand Coulee Dam, I think, in Washington, and taking pictures of it, and it actually turning out pretty well. I remember submitting a time to Nintendo Power, one of the top times in Banjo-Kazooie, by taking a picture on my Game Boy Camera, printing it out with a companion Game Boy printer on this tiny sticker thing, sending that in, and I got published in Nintendo Power for it. So if you still have the magazine from '98, you can probably find me in there. And also what I liked about the Game Boy Camera is they made taking pictures fun. I mean, for one, taking digital pictures was extremely novel at the time, but beyond that, you could do a lot with them. The game let you add stickers on top of it. You could even link pictures together. I think you could store 30 pictures at a time. You could link them together using hotspots. And I was able to create you could create games almost by doing this. So I ended up creating or recreating a version of Pokemon on the Game Boy Camera. I dedicated all 30 pictures to creating like an overworld of Pokemon. I even created a battle system where you could fight Pokemon and capture them. It was pretty intense, and I spent a lot of time on that game, and I still kick myself for deleting everything from my Game Boy Camera. But I would love to have made a video about that game. There are also mini games on there, and featuring like just weird elements. Like, I mean, the whole game had kind of like a weird vibe to it, which is something that seems to be common in Game Boy games now that I think about it, between Mario Land and Link's Awakening. The Game Boy Camera in particular had a weird menu system where there would sometimes be themed around RPGs. So like you'd have like this RPG like battle system, and you could choose like different battle commands to choose what part of the interface you want to go to next. And there were also cameos by Nintendo employees in the game. My teacher, when I worked in the call center, my lead, she appeared in the game as one of the racers. Like, her head's just on this little stick figure running along with you. So, yeah, the Game Boy Camera was just like a really fun, bizarre experience at the time that could let you do something that wouldn't become popular for another, almost 10 years with with digital cameras on phones.
Right.
Yeah. I never had a Game Boy Camera myself, just because, I don't know, the idea of taking pictures with my Game Boy never personally appealed to me, although it sounds like I missed out. But speaking of RPGs, we just had a re-release of a Game Boy game that I played a ton as a kid, which is Final Fantasy Adventure, and it's an action RPG. It's actually the first Secret of Mana game, and I think it holds up well today. I know, Derek, you just finished playing it for the first time, and I think you had a pretty good time yourself, right?
Yeah, I've always been kind of interested in Final Fantasy Adventure because I actually played Final Fantasy Legends as a kid, which was the Saga games, and I kind of dug it, but it was also really weird and didn't quite get into it. But playing Final Fantasy Adventure, like coming back to it for the first time, it is surprisingly good. Like, it does some things better than Link's Awakening, I'd say. Not all of it. I still think Link's Awakening is the more solid game, but what Final Fantasy Adventure was introducing was a lot of fun, and I just found myself engrossed with it and had a really good time.
Yeah, no, it really holds up well, and it's funny, you mentioned the Final Fantasy Legend, and I had the same exact experience. I played both, and I hated Legend, and I loved Adventure, and it wasn't until later when I figured out that the Legend games are actually the Romancing Saga games that I was like, oh, so these aren't really true Final Fantasy games. That's why I didn't like them. Although I have to say, I did go back and play Final Fantasy Legend 3 when I was a little older, and I loved it. I spent a ton of time on that game. So yeah, even in the RPG and action RPG side of things, the Game Boy killed it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I gotta say, the first time I experienced Metroid was with Metroid 2 on the Game Boy.
Be afraid. Be very afraid. One life-sucking Metroid survived the first Metroid adventure, and it's multiplying rapidly. You must help Samus save the universe again in Metroid 2. So we're giving you more power and mightier weapons to search a bigger world where hundreds of strange enemy life forms lurk. Destroy or be destroyed.
Metroid 2, The Return of Samus, only on Game Boy.
The future is in your hands.
Never made it that far because I didn't understand what I had to do and couldn't figure out where to go. But I'd still restart the game every so often and play it. It was a lot of fun. And I'm very upset at myself that I apparently sold it at some point. I no longer have it.
Oh, wow.
You can probably find
this
it for
probably
cheap,
isn't a
though.
popular opinion, but I don't think Metroid 1 or 2 particularly hold up very well.
No, it doesn't.
No.
No, but like, it's still novel for the time, having this giant, sprawling game on the Game Boy.
Without a map, John. It's a Metroid game
without
without a map.
Yeah, that was the rough part. I was just constantly like fiddling around trying to figure out where to go. I'd use the spider ball to just go along every surface to try to find where I needed to go.
Uh-huh. Have you guys noticed, though, there have been a lot of Game Boy remakes in recent years? Like, we had Metroid 2 was remade as Metroid Samus Returns a couple of years ago. Pokemon Red and Blue were remade as Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu. Link's Awakening is getting remade next month, or the month after even. It was just kind of in this era of Game Boy remakes, and I'm kind of wondering, like, what is next?
Where are the Mario Land remakes?
I know, right? I wouldn't turn my nose up at those.
Screw Mario. Where's my Wario Land remakes?
Oh, there you go.
I mean, it's kind of funny, kind of like how Yoshi took over the Mario World title for its sequel. With Super Mario Land 3 was called Wario Land of Super Mario Land 3. Like, Wario took over the whole thing.
Yeah, and he totally supplanted Mario on the Game Boy at that point. There were no more Mario platformers.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to see his evolution, because I think the original Wario Land pretty much played like Mario, just with Wario. He had a few different moves. And was it Wario Land 2 or 3 that introduced the fact that he was basically invincible, and he had to have different effects on him in order to progress and check out different things?
I think that was 2, but I don't remember for sure.
I think it was 2.
I remember being really novel, loving to see all the different animations, like him burning and turning to ash was always really funny to me as a kid.
Turning to ash sounds terrible.
I know, right? I will say that obviously I'm well known for hating Wario. He's like one of my least favorite Nintendo characters. However, this was back when I still thought the character was kind of like half a good character. He was okay. Like, I thought he was a cool rival. He was a cool foil for Mario in Mario Land 2. I thought that was cool. And then I played Wario Land, and it's a great game. I will defend Wario Land to the day I die. But then they just, I don't know, he became a caricature of himself, and now he's Wario today, and I hate him. But Wario Land, the first one, was super good.
Then you bring back the depth of Wario from the Nintendo Power comics, where they go into the into a psyche and explain,
that was so good.
Right?
Mario was such a jerk.
Yeah, that's why Wario turned out how he is, because Mario ruined him.
I completely forgot about that. I love that comic. Mario was such a bully.
He was. Yeah, Mario was a jerk. Well, we could talk about Game Boy games forever, and as much as I would love to, we have to get this discussion up at some point today. So, real quick though, I kind of want to wrap it up here maybe by talking about where is the Game Boy Classic? It seems like this was the perfect opportunity to announce a classic. They still could. They could still brand it as like a 30th celebration that they released it this year. Although I guess it already is lagging behind Japan, so I don't know if they would or not. But do we think it's actually coming? Do you guys expect a Game Boy Classic, or what do you expect to happen to all these Game Boy games? We're kind of touching on it just recently, just a moment ago, with them bringing some of them back in the form of remakes. What is the future of Game Boy here, or of the legacy of Game Boy, I should say?
I remember us having a conversation a long time ago about the Game Boy Classic and what we'd want to see from it. And it's a hard part is figuring out how to make it like HD, and utilize all that. Like, we had trouble figuring out exactly what you could do for it. So I still don't know the answer to that. But I'll tell you what, I'd be way more excited if Nintendo Switch Online started adding Game Boy games to the lineup rather than the typical Nintendo games.
That'd be great. Like that would actually kind of fit the whole, it's still within the 8-bit realm of the NES, and it's something that hasn't been completely overplayed. There's so many Game Boy games that haven't been re-released in any form, and even more than that. I mean, yeah, just a huge library of games that have barely been touched since they came out on the Game Boy. So.
Well, and there's a marketing angle here that could totally work with the 30th anniversary, which is exactly what they're discussing. The Switch is in effect Nintendo's latest handheld. It is in some way it can trace its origin back to the original Game Boy, right?
Absolutely.
So at least in a way. So they could do that, like the 30th anniversary classics collection on Nintendo Switch Online, and just drop a few games a month. That would be so cool.
I'd love that. I've been trying to hold back from mentioning the Game Boy Color this entire discussion because it's technically a different console.
Right.
But if they did a Game Boy Classic, do you think it would just be the Game Boy, or would it also include Game Boy Color?
Yeah, we've touched on this before. There's so many questions with the Game Boy Classic. I mean, I kind of want them to just stick with the Game Boy, just because I feel like there's a lot of underappreciated games on that I think deserve more attention. Whereas if you introduce a Game Boy Color, that's just going to, then you're going to get all the Game Boy Color games. You're going to get Mario Brothers Deluxe, which is barely a Game Boy game, even though it was great. That's still Mario Brothers. You're going to get Link's Awakening DX, which is a better version of it, but, you're going to get the Pokemon sequels. I don't know. I kind of want them to stick to the classics, the original games.
Sure.
I think the Game Boy Color games are really good. Like, you have the Zelda Oracles, but the pool of games is much smaller than the original Game Boy.
That's true,
so
too.
when you try and compile a list of the best Game Boy Color games, it gets a bit tricky after a while.
I do like, though, that he does kind of bring it full circle with the Game & Watch games, the original Nintendo handheld, with the Game & Watch Gallery series, which the first one, at least, or the first couple, I believe, were playable on the original Game Boy as well. And what was cool about it was it offered the original Game & Watch games, the original, LCD-style game, along with a newer version of it, which looked way better. So yeah, that would be kind of a cute way to go, to pay tribute to Nintendo's entire handheld line if they do, in fact, support Game Boy Color as part of the Game Boy Classic. And now that I think about it a little bit more, the question we had before is, what form would this take? Would they just re-release the original Game Boy brick form? And it doesn't seem realistic, as cool as that would be, because, I don't know, it is pretty big by modern standards. So maybe going the Game Boy Color route would be a good way of going about it, because they could kind of stick to the original version of that, while, so they're paying tribute to at least one form of the Game Boy. I guess it could go the Game Boy Pocket route as well, but that wasn't really that widely recognized, I feel like, so... I don't know, it's weird. I don't know how they go about this, if they do at all, so...
I think I concluded in our discussion about a theoretical Game Boy Classic that I thought they might do one next before the N64 Classic, but now, with the benefit of hindsight since then, I feel like if they were going to release this thing, they actually probably would have done it for the 30th anniversary, or at least by then, and I kind of don't see it happening anymore. I kind of think they're going to... It's just been too long since the SNES Classic. I think it feels like it makes more sense to me that they're just going to do the N64 at this point.
And it's a shame, because there's no real way to play Game Boy games right now, apart from the 3DS Virtual Console, but no one's playing a 3DS at the moment.
Yeah.
And they said that's why they're remaking Link's Awakening, because it's getting harder to find a way to play Link's Awakening. So
well, whose fault is that, Nintendo? So
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny how they're saying that when they're the gatekeepers on all these amazing games. They say people are having a hard time playing these days. Just release them.
Was Game Boy even one of the Virtual Console systems? It was on 3DS, right?
Only on 3DS.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's so much untapped potential there, and it bums me out. So I hope they figure something out here. But I want to replay these games, and I think there would be a hunger for some of it. So
yeah.
And it is good to see that some companies are finding ways for you to at least play some of these games, like the Kirby Anniversary Collection on Wii had Dreamland 1 and 2 on it. With the Castlevania recent release, they have the Game Boy Castlevania games on there, surprisingly. As Ash was saying, Final Fantasy Adventure now, thanks to the Mana Collection. We are finding ways to play some of these Game Boy games.
Hey, well, if you want to talk remakes or updates, the Kirby Superstar started it all by remaking the original Kirby's Dream Land as just one of the 8 games in that in that cartridge.
Exactly.
So. Yeah. All right. I guess let's wrap it up here. Any final thoughts about the Game Boy? Any final impressions or games you want to mention before we wrap it up here? Any parting thoughts for our audience?
What I find interesting is we all span different ages. I'm obviously the youngest, but the Game Boy has such a legacy behind it. It was on the market for a huge time. And then the Game Boy Advance kind of continued that legacy by being woefully backwards compatible with all of these Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games. So I think a lot of people listening to this discussion will probably span a lot of different generations. And whether they played these Game Boy games on the Game Boy Advance or the 3DS, that doesn't matter, because I think people just have great memories of these games because they're still good games today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of absurd, John, as you were saying, that the Game Boy, for as old as some of us are in this discussion, that thing lasted almost half our life, half our total life. Like, it's pretty absurd just how long the system hung on for. And again, that's largely, partially because of Pokemon, which really gave it a huge kick in the pants. But yeah, the Game Boy was a really great system, arguably, to some extent, ahead of its time. Although, what's interesting is, maybe it was just me, but I think a lot of people were under the impression that, if they even so much as thought about it, that the original Game Boy was the first handheld system to have interchangeable cartridges. It actually wasn't. Apparently, it was beaten by 10 years by a Game & Watch-like system called the Microvision, which I thought was interesting. Granted, its screen was 16 by 16 pixels, so not quite the same.
Oh my god!
And apparently barely sold anything, but I thought that was just really interesting. But the point is, the Game Boy really did popularize the system, the idea of a handheld console. Like, it made it viable, and in many respects, it killed it. Like, it killed it out of the gate. It offered an insane battery life. It offered, again, as we said, like an NES-like experience on the go, like a console-like experience, which was extremely novel at the time. And it's kind of crazy to me that it came out really just 4 years after the NES. Like, we were just getting used to console gaming, really, for many of us. And yet here, just a few years later, we could play on the go. Like, how lucky were we as kids?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you aren't kidding when you say it killed it, because there was a lot of challengers to the Game Boy.
And destroyed them all.
Nothing came close.
Nothing, yeah.
There is a reason Nintendo's been handheld dominant this entire time.
Are you dissing the Atari Lynx?
No one does, John. No one remembers the Atari Lynx.
I remember that. I didn't have it, but
it was huge.
I think you brought up a great point, John, about how we're all, the Game Boy has appealed to us across all these, we're all different ages, and we've all come at this thing from different points in our lives and different contexts, and it appeals to all of us. We all love the Game Boy, and I have to say, I never really thought about it in this context, but, I know that I always paid attention to game music on the NES, but I think it was not until the Game Boy where I really developed like my own personal relationship with it, because I had headphones and I'd never even considered listening to like video games with headphones on, and so it became a more personal experience, and I think that may have helped contribute to what would eventually become an obsession with video game music. But yeah, I'd never really thought about it in that context, but I think I can probably credit the Game Boy for kind of establishing that more personal link to the music and the games that I played.
It was totally Tetris Track A, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Track B. Track
B is
underappreciated.
Yeah.
Track B was cool.
A good thing about the music, though, is the Game Boy speaker is actually really high quality, and I think it might even you can get higher volume and maybe even higher quality than the Game Boy Advance speaker. It sounds good still.
What else was kind of cool about the Game Boy was not only was the speaker high quality, but the speaker was mono, obviously, just being a single speaker. But the system did support stereo, which I don't think the NES did. I think the NES was mono, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So yeah, if you used headphones or if you used the Handy Boy, as I did with the built-in speakers, the massive speakers, turn into like a little mini boombox, you can get some really good sounding quality out of the Game Boy, which was really neat. I remember, am I the only one? There were some games where I would literally hold the Game Boy up to my ear, like the speaker up to my ear, and just rock out to some tunes.
Do you know who you're on a discussion with? Of course, you're not the only one.
I
did that all the time.
That makes me happy.
Yeah, no, I did that all the time, and I don't know if it ever drove my parents crazy, when I wouldn't play with headphones, but. No, I mean, I would rock out to Game Boy music a lot. So, no, you definitely were not the only one.
All right, I think that brings us to the end of our Game Boy 30th anniversary, in North America at least, discussion. So thanks, John, for joining us, but I know it won't be the 30th anniversary for you for a couple of months yet, but it's coming up soon. And with that, thanks for watching. Of course, stay tuned to Game Explained for more retrospectives in the future, hopefully, including, if you want more, by the way, make sure to check out our retrospective on Ocarina of Time, which we did for, I think it's, was it his 20th anniversary? I think?
Maybe
yes,
25th?
I think 20th.
20th, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think last year. So, yeah, so check that out. There's a link on the screen. And of course, stay tuned to Game Explained for tons more on everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.